The blind girl and the village's cruelty. In the heart of the land, where the river sang to the moon and the wind carried the whispers of spirits, lay the village of Olo. It was a place of laughter, of market women calling out their wares, of men sharing palm wine under the shade of great baobab trees. But it was also a place of cruelty, where the weak were often forgotten, and the unfortunate were cast aside. At the very edge of this village, in a hut so broken that even the wind passed through its cracks without resistance, lived Nyala. She had been blind since birth. Her mother had died when she was still a child, and her father, believing she was cursed, had abandoned her. The villagers, bound by duty more than kindness, sometimes left scraps of food outside her hut. A half-eaten yam, a cup of cold porridge, a handful of groundnuts, these were her feasts. Nyala's world was dark, but her heart was light. She knew the people around her by their voices, by the way their footsteps pressed against the earth, by the scent of soap or smoke that clung to their clothes. When someone offered her food, she smiled and whispered a blessing. But many in the village avoided her. To them, she was a reminder of misfortune, a child abandoned by her own family, left to be swallowed by the fate the gods had chosen for her. Yet there was one person who noticed Nyala not with kindness, but with dangerous curiosity. The shadow in the village. Among the villagers was a man named Jabari. He was strong, tall, and his voice carried like thunder, but his heart was as cruel as a snake waiting in the grass. The people feared him. Mothers warned their daughters to stay away. Men clenched their fists when he passed, but no one dared to challenge him. He had a way of getting what he wanted, and what he wanted, he took. Jabari was known for his misdeeds. He would steal from merchants, charm young women only to cast them aside, and intimidate those too weak to fight back. He had no respect for the elders and no fear of the gods. If there was a line between right and wrong, Jabari had long since crossed it. And now, his attention had turned to Nyala. At first, he only watched. She was just a blind girl, sitting at the threshold of her broken hut, listening to the world she could not see. She was fragile, small, and, above all, alone. There was something about her that made Jabari smirk. A girl like that would never see him coming. The first visit. One evening, as the sky turned red and the smell of roasted fish filled the air, Jabari made his way to Nyala's hut. He had never spoken to her before, and she had never had reason to fear him. Nyala, he called, his voice suddenly gentle, a tone he rarely used. Nyala lifted her head, startled. Yes, she said softly. She knew his voice. Everyone did. But why was he here? I brought you food, he said, stepping closer. She hesitated, listening. The other villagers left food outside. They never handed it to her directly. You don't have to be afraid, Jabari said, his voice warm with false kindness. Eat. Nyala reached out and felt the warm bowl in her hands. The scent of fresh fish and pounded yam rose to her nose. It smelled delicious. She had not eaten anything but scraps for days. Thank you, she whispered. May the gods bless you. Jabari smiled, but it was not a smile of kindness. The wolf in sheep's clothing. That night, Jabari sat outside his own hut, staring into the fire. The blind girl had thanked him. She had trusted him. He had never felt that before. For the first time, he felt like a god, someone who could give and take at will. His mind whispered, she has no one. He grinned. Tomorrow, he would visit her again. But Nyala had no way of knowing that her darkest days were only just beginning. The predator's shadow. The village of Olo moved as it always did, under the watchful eye of the sun, under the whispers of the trees, under the weight of unspoken truths. People lived, people laughed, and people turned their faces away from things they did not wish to see. But in the shadows, something sinister stirred. Jabari, the man whom people feared but no one stopped, had set his sights on Nyala. The blind girl, helpless, alone, with no father to defend her, no mother to shield her, had become a thought he could not shake. And thoughts like that, in the mind of a man like Jabari, were like a vulture circling over a wounded animal. The game begins. Jabari returned the next day, and the next. At first, Nyala hesitated, but she could not refuse kindness when she had been given so little of it. She accepted his gifts, warm food, a new cloth to wrap around herself, even small wooden carvings he claimed to have made for her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked one evening, her voice carrying the innocent curiosity of someone who had never known true deceit. Jabari laughed, a sound that made the birds in the trees go silent. "Because you are special, Nyala," he said. She did not know the weight of his words. She did not know that his kindness was a rope tightening around her throat. The whispering wind. The village began to notice. Women at the river spoke in hushed voices as they washed their clothes. "Jabari has taken an interest in the blind girl." "Why?" "He has never given anything without wanting something in return." The elders, seated beneath the sacred Iroko tree, furrowed their brows but said nothing. Who would dare challenge Jabari? Even the children, who knew little of the wickedness in men's hearts, felt a shiver in the air when they saw Jabari walking towards the edge of the village, towards Nyala's lonely hut. The night of no moon. Then came the night when the moon refused to rise. The stars hid behind thick clouds, and the only sound was the wind shifting through the trees. Jabari stood outside Nyala's hut, his shadow stretching long and dark in the lantern light. Inside, Nyala sat, unaware of the danger that breathed just beyond her fragile walls. "Nyala," Jabari called, his voice thick with something she could not name. She smiled, standing slowly, her blind eyes trusting the voice that had brought her food, warmth, and comfort. But before she could speak, she felt his hand on her arm. Strong. Tight. "Jabari," she whispered, her smile faltering. "SHH," he said. His other hand brushed her cheek, but it did not feel kind this time. Nyala froze. Something in the air had changed. She tried to step back, but his grip tightened. "Let go," she said softly, but there was an unease in her voice now. Jabari chuckled, low and dark. "You owe me, Nyala." She felt the hairs on her arms rise. "Owe you? For everything I have given you." His breath was close now. "Do you think a man gives without wanting something in return?" A cold wave of realization crashed over Nyala. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She was blind. Alone. Weak. And Jabari knew it. "Jabari, please." But her plea fell into the empty night. The hut creaked, the wind howled, and Nyala learned, for the first time, what it meant to be truly powerless. A curse upon a man. When it was over, Jabari stood, satisfied, untouched by shame, and left without looking back. Nyala, cold on the cold earth, could only shake. She had always believed in the kindness of the world. She had believed that even in the darkness, there was warmth, there was light. But now, darkness was all that remained. And then, something inside her shifted. Through her pain, anger stirred. A deep, burning rage unlike anything she had ever known. She turned her face to the sky, to the gods that watched silently, and she spoke through her tears. "May the wind refuse to carry your name." Jabari stopped in his tracks outside the hut, frowning. "May the earth turn against you." The air grew still. "May you never know peace until your soul is weighed against mine." A single gust of wind swept through the village, rustling the trees, making even the old ones at their fires glance up in unease. And Jabari, for the first time in his life, felt cold fingers trail up his spine. But he shook it off, laughing to himself as he walked away. What could a blind girl's words do to a man like him? Nothing. Or so he thought. But the gods do not sleep. And the gods never forget. The price of evil. Jabari left Nyala's hut that night a man without guilt. He had always taken what he wanted, and nothing had ever stopped him before. Why should this be any different? But the wind carried Nyala's curse far beyond the village. It slipped through the trees like a shadow, whispering through the roots of ancient baobabs, sinking into the earth. And the gods, silent, patient, watching, listened. The unraveling. It started small. The next morning, as Jabari stepped outside his hut, he tripped over nothing and fell hard onto the ground. The village children, sitting by the well, laughed. Jabari gritted his teeth. A small thing. A moment of foolishness. But then, as he reached for his spear, the wooden shaft splintered in his hand, slicing open his palm. A bad omen. He shook it off. But when he reached his livestock pen, the animals, goats, chickens, even his prized bull, shrank away from him, as if sensing something wrong. His bull, the strongest in the village, stared at him with wild eyes before bellowing and breaking free, charging into the fields, never to return. The villagers whispered. Was this a sign? Jabari ignored them. But the feeling clung to him. For the first time in his life, he felt washed. The shadows grew longer. As the weeks passed, things worsened. His crops failed even though the rains were steady. His closest friend, a man he had once trusted, avoided him now, refusing to even meet his eyes. And then, his wives left him. First, the younger one, who had always been nervous around him. She packed her things and disappeared one morning without a word. Then, the older one, the mother of his only son. She stood before him in their home, her voice quiet but firm. There is something dark in you now, Jabari, she said. I will not stay to see where it leads. She took their child and left. And that was when fear began to settle in his bones. The visit to the seer. Jabari had never feared spirits. He had never cared for the warnings of elders or the whispers of old women who spoke of the gods' judgment. But now, he could not sleep. The nights were filled with shadows that stretched too long, with the sound of distant whispers, of unseen things moving just beyond his reach. So, at last, he swallowed his pride and went to see Baba Ikin, the village seer. The old man lived deep in the forest, his hut surrounded by charms and bones tied to tree branches, rattling in the wind. Jabari did not knock. He pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning herbs. Baba Ikin sat cross-legged, his white eyes staring into something only he could see. You should not have come, the seer said before Jabari even spoke. Jabari stiffened. I need answers. The old man did not move. No, you seek relief. But the gods do not offer mercy where none was given. Jabari clenched his fist. Tell me what is happening. Baba Ikin sighed. He reached for a small bowl of water, murmuring words older than the village itself. The water rippled. And then darkened. Jabari leaned forward, only to gasp as the water twisted into a reflection of Nyala's face. Her eyes, once unseen, were now sharp as blades, her expression unreadable. Jabari staggered back. What trick is this? The old man closed the bowl, his voice heavy. You took what was not yours, he said. And the gods have answered her call. Jabari's mouth went dry. I don't believe in curses. Baba Ikin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then why do you fear? The desperation. Jabari left the forest running, his heart pounding like a drum. He told himself it was nonsense. Superstition. But that night, when he lay in his bed, he felt something crawl over his skin. Something that was not there. a breath, cold as the grave, against his ear. And a voice, a whisper, so quiet it could have been the wind. But it was not the wind. You are already lost. Jabari bolted upright, gasping for air. For the first time in his life, he felt true terror. The search for Nyala. The next morning, he stormed into the village, demanding answers. Where is she? He growled at the traders in the market. The women shook their heads. She is gone. Jabari's pulse spiked. Gone where? She left, the night after you. One woman stopped herself, looking away. Jabari grabbed her wrist. Tell me. She ripped her arm free, her voice sharp with disgust. You defiled a girl who had nothing, Jabari. And now the gods have taken her away from you. Jabari stumbled back. Gone. No. No, she couldn't be gone. If she was gone, how would he lift this curse? He had to find her. Because if he didn't, he would not survive what came next. Nyala's journey into the unknown. The night Nyala fled the village, the sky refused to shine for her. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the trees, ancient and wise, whispered warnings she could not understand. Her bare feet pressed against the cold earth, stumbling over roots, feeling the bite of sharp stones. She had never walked beyond the outskirts of Olo. But she had no choice. She had nothing left there. The road of the forgotten. Nyala walked. She walked through the dark, guided only by her memory of sounds and scents. She felt the shift in the earth beneath her feet. The familiar dry dust of the village gave way to the soft dampness of the deep forest. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could not stop. The night air pressed against her, thick with the scent of wet leaves and distant water. The forest had its own rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat that was neither welcoming nor cruel. It simply existed. Unlike humans, the forest did not judge. Unlike Jabari, the trees did not take. Here, Nyala was no one. And for the first time, that was a blessing. But the world does not let the lost wander forever. Not without a price. The stranger on the road. She heard the footsteps first. Soft at first. Then closer. Nyala's body tensed. She had lived her whole life in darkness, but she knew the difference between the harmless rustling of a lizard and the measured steps of a man. She stopped. The footsteps stopped too. Her breath quickened. Was it Jabari? Had he followed her? Who is there? She whispered. Silence. Then, a voice, deep and unfamiliar. You should not be here, little one. Nyala swallowed, turning her head toward the sound. The voice was not cruel. It was not soft either. It carried something else. Something she had never heard before. Curiosity. Caution. And sadness. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted, her voice barely above the wind. The man did not answer right away. Then, she heard movement. The sound of cloth shifting, the scrape of a wooden staff against stone. You are blind, he said, not as a question, but as an observation. Nyala stiffened. Yes. A pause. Then. Come with me. And though she had every reason to fear him, though she had never trusted a stranger in her life, she followed. Because she had nothing left to lose. The man who walked without fear. His name was Kamari. He was a traveler, a healer who had walked the lands from coast to mountain, from river to desert. He did not tell her why he was here. He did not ask why she had run. But in his silence, there was no pity. And for that, Nyala was grateful. She walked beside him, listening to the way he moved, the careful steps, the rhythm of his breath, the shift of a blade at his waist. He was not an old man. Not a village elder. But there was wisdom in his silence, as though he had seen things no one should see. As they walked, he asked only one thing. "Where does your heart tell you to go?" Nyala had no answer. So Komari chose for her. The House of Spirits. By dawn, they reached a place unlike any she had ever known. A temple carved into the cliffs, where the wind sang through stone, and the air smelled of herbs and rain. "This is where I will leave you," Komari said. Nyala turned her head sharply. "Viv, I brought you to those who can help." "Who?" Before he could answer, they appeared. Women, dressed in robes of dark blue and gold, their faces painted with symbols older than the village of Olo itself. High priestesses. Women who spoke to spirits. Women who could speak to the gods. Nyala felt their presence before they even spoke. One of them stepped forward, her voice low and powerful. "You were sent to us, child." Nyala swallowed. "I was cursed." The priestess laughed softly. "No, little one. You were chosen." Nyala did not understand. But she followed. Because for the first time in her life, she felt something greater than fear. She felt purpose. The eyes of the gods. They bathed her in sacred water. They wrapped her in cloth spun from the threads of the sky itself. And on the seventh night, beneath the full moon, they laid their hands on her blind eyes. A chant. A whisper. A prayer older than time. And then, for the first time in her life, Nyala saw. Not with her hands. Not with her ears. Not with the darkness she had always known. But with light. And the first thing she saw was herself. And she was not weak. She was not broken. She was something else. Something powerful. Something meant for more. And the god smiled upon her. Because the girl who had once been blind would soon make the man who took everything beg for mercy. The cursed man's fall. Jabari had once been a man that others feared. Now, he was a man that the world itself rejected. A king without a throne. When Jabari returned to his village, he was no longer a man of strength. His clothes were tattered. His once powerful stride had become weak, his steps uncertain. He had lived his life like a lion among sheep, but now, even the wind refused to carry his name. The moment he stepped past the village gates, the children ran. The women turned away. The men, once too afraid to challenge him, did not even acknowledge him. To them, he was already dead. Jabari clenched his fist. "You dare ignore me?" No one answered. For the first time in his life, he was nothing. And in that silence, something inside him broke. The plague of the spirits. The curse did not stop with whispers in the wind. Jabari had seen his crops fail. His livestock die. His wives abandon him. But worse than all of that, the nightmares. Every night, when he closed his eyes, he found himself trapped. Trapped inside Nyala's hut, the place where he had taken everything from her. Only now, he was the one who could not move. The walls of the hut closed in, the shadows grew longer, and in the darkness, he could hear her voice. "You did not fear me when I was blind," she whispered. Jabari's body tensed, but he could not see her. "Do you fear me now?" And then, fingers brushed his throat. Not soft. Not human. Something else. Something cold. Jabari woke up screaming. The search for salvation. There was only one way to break a curse. He needed to find Nyala. He needed her forgiveness. But when he stormed into the village square, demanding answers, he was met with only shaking heads and whispers. "She is gone," they told him. "She has left this place. She is beyond your reach." Jabari refused to believe it. If he did not find her, the curse would never break. If he did not find her, he would die like a forgotten name in the dust. So he left the village. He walked, without food, without water, with only desperation in his veins. And when his legs could carry him no longer, when he collapsed by the side of a river, he prayed. For the first time in his life, he prayed. Spirits of the land, he whispered. Show me the way. The river did not answer. The sky did not open. But the wind shifted. And in that wind, a single voice. A name. Nyala. Jabari's heart stopped. She was alive. And now, he knew where to go. The city of the chosen. The journey took him beyond the lands he had ever known. He traveled through mountains that touched the clouds, through deserts where the sun whispered secrets, through forests where the trees bent like listening ears. And at the end of it all, he arrived in a place he never imagined. A city carved into the cliffs. A place where spirits walked among the living. A place where a blind girl had become a woman of power. Jabari did not recognize the woman standing before him. She wore robes of deep blue, stitched with symbols of the old gods. Her hair was braided with golden beads, her hands adorned with rings of wisdom. And her eyes. They were not blind anymore. Nyala looked at him as if she had always seen him. And for the first time, Jabari fell to his knees. Because he knew. He had spent his whole life taken. Now, he was a man who had nothing left to give. And only one person could decide whether he would rise again or be forgotten forever. Nyala. A test of forgiveness. Jabari had always been a man who demanded. Now, he was a man who begged. Kneeling before Nyala, he could not speak. His throat was dry, but not from thirst. From fear. The woman before him was not the girl he had left in the dirt. She was something greater. And she was looking at him. With eyes that saw everything. The weight of a name. I never thought I would hear your name again, Nyala said, her voice as calm as still water. Jabari swallowed hard. You can see, he whispered. Nyala tilted her head, her gaze never leaving him. Does that frighten you? Jabari did not answer. Because yes. Yes, it did. She stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, her robes whispering against the stone floor. You came all this way, she said. What is it you want, Jabari? Her voice did not shake. She was not afraid of him. Jabari hated himself for realizing that he was afraid of her. His voice cracked. I seek forgiveness. Nyala's expression did not change. And then, she laughed. It was not cruel. Not mocking. It was a laugh of disbelief. Jabari flinched. Forgiveness. Nyala repeated, as if the word itself was foreign to her tongue. You want me to take away your suffering? Jabari lowered his head. Please. Nyala's fingers curled into fists. You want my mercy, she said, her voice sharpening like a blade. Jabari forced himself to look at her. Yes. Nyala's face was unreadable. And then, she said something that made his blood turn to ice. Then earn it. The trial of shadows. Jabari blinked. What? Nyala stepped past him, toward a brazier burning with sacred herbs. You have come seeking peace, she said, but peace is not given. She turned back, her eyes glinting like firelight on steel. It is taken. Jabari swallowed. What must I do? Nyala motioned to the priestesses who stood at the edge of the great hall. One of them stepped forward, holding a bowl of blackened water. Jabari felt a chill creep up his spine. This is water from the well of remembrance, Nyala said. Drink, and you will face the weight of what you have done. Jabari stared at the bowl. Face it how? Nyala's lips pressed into a thin line. You will know. Jabari hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, he took the bowl. And drank. The shadows speak. The moment the water touched his tongue, Jabari's vision blurred. The room around him melted away. And then, he was back in Olo. Not as the man he was now. As the man he had been. He watched himself stride through the village, his voice sharp, his hands quick to take. He saw the fear in the eyes of the people. The way they stepped aside when he passed. He saw the faces of the women he had hurt. And then, he saw her. Nyala. The girl he had broken. He watched as his past self stepped toward her hurt. Watched as he took what was not his. And for the first time, he saw himself through her eyes. He felt her fear. Her pain. He felt what it was like to be helpless beneath the weight of another's cruelty. And it shattered him. The breaking of a man. Jabari fell to his knees, gasping for air. The vision ripped away, and he was back in the temple. But something inside him had changed. Tears streamed down his face. Nyala watched, her expression unreadable. Now you understand, she said quietly. Jabari could not speak. Because there were no words. There was only guilt. Raw. Unforgiving. He choked. I never. You never thought about what you left behind, Nyala finished for him. Jabari nodded weakly. And then, Nyala did something he never expected. She knelt before him. Jabari, she said softly. Your suffering does not erase mine. Jabari trembled. But, Nyala continued, the gods have given me back what you took. My sight. My strength. My future. She inhaled deeply. And I will not waste it on hating you. Jabari's breath hitched. I forgive you, Nyala said. Jabari sagged, his body trembling, the weight of his sins pressing down like stones upon his back. But then, Nyala's hand touched his chin. She lifted his face. But forgiveness, she whispered, her voice sharp as a blade, does not mean I will forget. Jabari's blood ran cold. Nyala's eyes burned into him. You will spend the rest of your life ensuring no one else suffers as I did, she said. Jabari nodded. Not because he had to. But because he wanted to. And in that moment, he knew. Nyala had won. Not with hatred. Not with vengeance. But with something stronger. With justice. Redemption or damnation. Jabari left the temple that day a different man, but different did not mean free. Nyala had forgiven him, but her words stayed with him like a brand on his soul. Forgiveness does not mean I will forget. And neither would the world. Forgiveness was a door. But redemption was a road. And Jabari was only at the beginning. The return to Olo. When he returned to his village, the people did not welcome him. They did not speak his name. To them, he was a ghost of his own making. A man cast not by magic, but by his own past. Jabari stood at the edge of the village, staring at the place he once ruled with fear. Now, he was no one. And the weight of that truth crushed him. But he did not turn away. Because he had come back for a reason. Not to be forgiven by them. But to change. To become the man he should have been all along. The village watches. At first, no one trusted him. When he walked into the market, the traders refused to sell to him. When he passed the river, women turned their backs. Even the children, once terrified of him, looked at him with disgust. Jabari did not blame them. But he did not leave. Instead, he walked. He helped the farmers carry their harvest. He rebuilt the homes he had once burned in anger. He offered his strength to those who needed it, without asking for anything in return. And slowly, the village began to whisper. Not in fear. Not in hatred. But in confusion. Because the man they had known would never have done these things. The first test. One night, a shout rang through the village. Jabari looked up from where he was laying bricks for a broken wall. A young girl was crying. A man, one of the traders, had grabbed her wrist, his voice sharp with threats. The village froze. This was how it had always been. Men with power took. Girls with nothing suffered. And no one stopped it. Because no one had ever stopped Jabari before. But Jabari was not the same man. He stepped forward. The trader turned, startled. You. The man sneered. What does a broken man have to say to me? Jabari did not answer. He did not need to. He simply grabbed the man's wrist and twisted. The trader cried out in pain and let go of the girl. She stumbled back, tears in her eyes. Jabari stared at the man, his voice low, steady. If I ever see you touch her again, he said, his tone carved from stone, I will remind you what fear feels like. The trader paled. And for the first time, the village saw him differently. Not as a monster. Not as a man trying to erase his sins. But as something else. Something they had never expected. A protector. The redemption of a man. Days passed. Then weeks. Jabari did not stop. He fought for those he had once hurt. He protected those who had once feared him. And though the village never forgot what he had done, they began to believe in what he could become. A message from the past. One day, as the sun set over Olo, a messenger arrived. A boy, no older than 10, with skin the color of deep earth and eyes that burned like embers. He handed Jabari a sealed letter. Jabari stared at it, heart pounding. The seal was gold. The symbol. One he knew. One he would never forget. Nyala. With shaking hands, Jabari broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Only one sentence was written inside. Do not waste the life I spared. Jabari's hands clenched around the paper. Because he knew. Nyala was watching. And she had given him one last chance. To be more than a man seeking forgiveness. To be a man who deserved it. The end of the road. Years passed. And the village no longer spoke Jabari's name in fear. They no longer whispered about his sins. Instead, they spoke of what he had done to make things right. They spoke of how he had changed. They spoke of the protector of Olo. The man who once ruled by fear, now ruled by justice. And far away, in the city of the cliffs, Nyala heard the stories. She never returned. She never needed to. Because she knew. She had won. And Jabari. Jabari had become the man he was always meant to be. Not because of a curse. Not because of fear. But because he chose to be. And sometimes, that is the greatest redemption of all.